They thought your silence meant defeat. They watched you, measured you, convinced themselves that your stillness was proof of surrender. They whispered in hushed voices, smirking behind closed doors, certain that you had been broken, that you had accepted your place beneath their feet, that your quiet meant you had nothing left to fight with. But what they never understood, what they never saw coming, was that silence is not submission. It is strategy. It is the inhale before the battle cry, the coiled tension before the strike, the storm gathering itself in the distance before it tears through the sky. You were never weak. You were waiting, calculating, sharpening yourself in the shadows while they grew comfortable, complacent, blind. They mistook your patience for passivity, your endurance for obedience. But you were never meant to stay quiet forever. You were simply listening, memorizing every insult, every doubt, every moment they dismissed you. You let them build their false sense of control, let them laugh, let them believe they had won. And now, it's time. Time to move. Time to show them exactly what silence was hiding all along. You feel it, don't you? That pull in your chest, that fire in your gut, that undeniable knowing that you were never meant to stay small, that this moment is not just another breath in the life they tried to script for you, but the moment everything shifts, the moment you take back the pen, rip the pages they wrote for you, and carve your own path in stone. Because this world does not belong to those who watch and wait for permission. It belongs to those who decide, who dare, who break every expectation and rise. But let's be real. You've been here before. You've felt the spark, the momentary surge of rebellion, only to have it extinguished by the weight of doubt, by the voices, inside and out. That whisper, what if they're right? What if you fail? What if you're not enough? And so you hesitate, you hold back, you shrink, and they win. Not because they are stronger, not because they are better, but because they convinced you to chain yourself when they never had the power to do it themselves. Enough. Enough of the waiting, the questioning, the apologizing for taking up space. Enough of letting them define your worth, of swallowing your voice just to keep them comfortable. You know, deep down, you were made for more. You've always known. The only question that remains is, when will you act like it? They thought you'd stay silent, that you'd let the world shape you, bend you, erase you. They counted on your fear, on your hesitation, on your willingness to accept less than you were born for. But what they failed to realize is that silence is not the absence of power. It is the gathering of it. It is the moment before the tidal wave crashes, before the fire consumes, before the earth splits open and nothing is ever the same again. And now, here you stand, on the edge of that moment, a decision burning in your hands. Will you stay in the quiet, where it's safe, where it's known, or will you step forward, knowing that once you do, there is no turning back? Because this is not just about proving them wrong. This is about proving yourself right. About stepping into everything they tried to keep from you. About making noise, not with words, but with action. With undeniable, unstoppable, relentless movement. They thought you would stay in the background, that you would fold, that you would accept their version of you. But they underestimated the one thing they should have feared the most. You. Not just the you they've seen, but the you that's been waiting beneath the surface. The you that was forged in struggle, in rejection. In every moment you were overlooked. That poor you, the you that you even referred to a man. The you that was forged in struggle, in rejection. The you that doesn't need approval, doesn't need permission, doesn't need their validation to rise. This moment isn't coming, it's here. This decision isn't waiting, it's now. And the only thing left to do is move. Move in a way that makes them realize, too late, that you were never silent. You were simply preparing. And now, they will hear you whether they are ready or not. They told you who you were before you even had a chance to decide for yourself. They carved your identity from their own fears, their own insecurities, their own limited vision of what you could be. And like a child tracing the lines of a story already written, you believed them. You carried their words like gospel, let them settle in your bones until they felt like truth. You swallowed their judgments, their labels, their definitions of what you were allowed to become, and with every passing day you shrank, fitting yourself into the mold they designed, mistaking it for belonging. But it never felt right, did it? There was always something inside you that rebelled, something that screamed against the confinement, even when you tried to silence it. A voice that whispered in the dead of night, this is not who you are, this is not all you are meant to be. And yet every time you tried to listen, the world around you got louder. Stay in line, don't make waves, know your place. The voices came from everywhere, family, friends, society. They came wrapped in false concern, in backhanded compliments, in the suffocating weight of expectation. You shouldn't dream so big. You shouldn't speak so loud. You shouldn't want so much. And the worst part? you started to believe them, started to second guess the fire inside you, started to dim your own light to match the dull glow of those too afraid to burn. You traded your voice for acceptance, your dreams for approval, your power for their comfort. And in doing so, you became a version of yourself that felt foreign, unrecognizable, a shadow of what you could have been. But the betrayal wasn't just external. It wasn't just the world telling you who you were. It was the voice inside your own head that turned against you. The whispers of doubt that crawled into your mind, poisoning every ounce of confidence before it had a chance to take root. The voice that asked, what if they're right? What if I'm not enough? What if I fail? And failure? Oh, how they made you fear it. As if stumbling meant you were broken. As if making mistakes meant you weren't worthy of the life you dreamed of. You've carried this weight for so long, haven't you? The burden of not just your own fears, but the fears of those who raised you, taught you, shaped you. They made you believe that playing small was safety, that silence was survival, that staying in your place was the only way to be loved. And so you obeyed, not because you were weak, but because you thought that was the price of acceptance. That to be seen, you had to be less. That to be loved, you had to be small. But let me ask you this, where has that gotten you? Has shrinking made you happy? Has silence given you peace? Or do you feel the slow suffocation of a life unlived, of a potential left untapped, of a voice that aches to be heard? Because no matter how much they try to bury it, the truth remains. You were never meant to fit into their expectations. You were meant to break them. And yet, the fear lingers, doesn't it? The fear of judgment, of standing out, of being too much. The fear that if you finally step into your power, you'll lose the approval you spent your whole life chasing. That they'll call you arrogant, selfish, ungrateful. That they'll resent the fact that you dared to want more than they did. And maybe they will. Maybe they'll turn their backs. Maybe they'll try to pull you back into the box they built for you. But let me tell you something. If their love is conditional on your silence, it was never love to begin with. The villain in your story was never just the people who doubted you. It was never just the society that tried to cage you. The real villain has always been the fear that convinced you to listen. The voice that kept you paralyzed, that told you to settle, that made you think you had to earn the right to take up space. That villain lives inside you, and it has fed off your uncertainty, grown strong on your hesitation. But now, you see it for what it is, and now, you have a choice. Will you keep feeding it? Will you keep letting it dictate your life? Keep letting it steal your voice, your dreams, your power? Or will you finally stand up and fight? Because make no mistake, this is a battle. A war between the version of you they created and the version of you that has been waiting, clawing, begging to be unleashed. And I promise you this, the moment you decide to fight, the moment you decide to silence that doubt and take back what was always yours, the world will shift. The weight will start to lift. And for the first time in your life, you will understand what it means to truly breathe. They told you who you were. They tried to write your story, but they underestimated one thing. You were never meant to be written by their hands. You were meant to be the one holding the pen. And now it's time to write yourself free. There was a moment, you remember it well, the moment where the weight became too much, where the voices in your head weren't whispers anymore, but a deafening roar. The moment when every doubt, every fear, every cruel word ever thrown your way gathered into a storm so violent, so relentless, that it threatened to drown you. You stood there, motionless, trapped between the life you were told to accept and the life you were too afraid to reach for. You were trapped. For almost 2 months then, the life you were told to accept and the life you were too afraid to reach for. And in that moment, for the first time, you almost gave in. It wasn't sudden, no, it was slow, like a crack in the foundation, spreading inch by inch, barely noticeable until one day, the whole structure threatened to collapse. You had been fighting for so long, hadn't you? Fighting to be seen, fighting to be heard, fighting to prove, to them, to yourself, that you were worthy. But no matter how hard you pushed, it felt like the world pushed back harder. No matter how many times you stood up, someone was always there to knock you down. And after enough falls, after enough bruises, after enough nights staring at the ceiling, wondering if this fight was even worth it, you started to question if maybe, just maybe, they were right. Maybe I am not enough. Maybe I was never meant to be more than this. Maybe silence is all I have left. Because the truth is, you were tired, not just physically, but soul-deep exhaustion, the kind that seeps into your bones, makes it hard to breathe, makes every step feel heavier than the last. You were tired of proving yourself, tired of the fight, tired of holding on to a dream that felt further away with every passing day. You looked around and saw people who had settled, who had accepted their place, who had learned to live within the lines drawn for them. And for the first time, you wondered if they had it right, if maybe peace wasn't found in the fight but in surrender. So you stood on the edge of that decision, one foot hovering over the abyss, ready to let go, ready to disappear into the version of yourself they had written for you, ready to fade into the background, to become the silence they always expected from you. But just as you were about to take that final step, something inside you shifted. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, it wasn't some grand moment of realization, it was just a flicker, small, barely noticeable, but unbreakable. A whisper beneath the storm, a pulse of something ancient, something untamed, a feeling that, despite everything, despite the doubt, despite the exhaustion, despite the endless voices telling you to stop, you were still here. Do you hear me? You were still here. With every reason to give up, you hadn't. With every force trying to silence you, you were still breathing. With every wall in your way, you were still standing. And that meant something. That meant everything. Because if there was even the smallest ember still burning inside you, it meant the fire wasn't out yet. It meant there was still something left to fight for, something worth rising for, something inside you that refused to be erased, and so you made a choice. Not a loud one, not a dramatic one, just a simple, quiet decision. Not yet, not today, not like this. You took a breath, clenched your fists, and stepped back from the edge. They almost had you. Almost convinced you to disappear, almost buried you beneath the weight of your own doubt. Almost, but almost isn't enough to break you. It started as a whisper, so quiet at first that you almost missed it. A flicker of something deep inside, hidden beneath the rubble of everything you had been told to be. It wasn't loud, it wasn't a roar, it was just a feeling, a shift, a moment where something inside you stirred, a defiance you couldn't quite name, an instinct that refused to be buried. An instinct. They almost had you. They almost made you believe you were powerless. Almost convinced you that you were meant to stay small, to stay silent. Almost. But something inside you, something untamed, something unbroken, refused. And it was in that refusal that the shift began. Because the truth is, you were never weak. You were never meant to stay in the shadows. You weren't lost, you were becoming. Every doubt, every setback, every moment of despair was not proof of your failure, but evidence of your transformation. You were not being buried, you were being planted. Think about it. A seed spends its first days in the darkness, covered in soil, unseen by the world. From the outside, it looks like nothing is happening. It looks like death, but beneath the surface, roots are forming. Strength is building, the foundation is being laid, and when the moment is right, that seed breaks through. Not as the fragile thing it once was, but as something powerful, something unstoppable. And you are that seed. They mistook your silence for surrender, but they never realized what was happening beneath the surface. They never saw the roots digging deep, the strength forming in your solitude, the resilience growing in every moment. They underestimated you. They never realized that every struggle, every hardship, every scar was preparing you, not for destruction, but for your breakthrough. Because transformation isn't about waiting for permission. It isn't about asking the world if it's ready for you. It's about deciding that you will no longer be defined by the limits they placed on you. Deciding that your voice, your power, your existence is not something to be contained. Deciding that no matter how deep they tried to bury you, you will rise. And now, here you are, standing on the edge of something new. You feel it, don't you? That pull in your chest, that fire in your veins, that undeniable knowing that you were meant for more, that you've been preparing for this moment even when you didn't realize it. So now, the only question is, what will you do with it? Will you stay in the soil, safe in the comfort of what's familiar? Or will you break through, push forward, and step into the unstoppable force you were always meant to become? Because the whisper inside you is growing louder. It's no longer a question, it's a command. Rise. They never saw you coming. While they laughed, while they doubted, while they convinced themselves that your silence meant surrender, you were building. In the shadows, away from their eyes, away from their judgments, you were putting in the work. Every day they underestimated you was a day you sharpened your edges. Every time they overlooked you was fuel to the fire they didn't know was growing inside you. You didn't waste time trying to convince them, trying to prove your worth with words. No, you moved in silence. Because power isn't announced, it is demonstrated. You let them believe they had won. Let them think you had accepted your fate. Let them settle into their comfort while you prepared for something far greater. While they talked, you acted. While they stayed the same, you evolved. And now, They are about to witness the force they never thought to fear. The world loves an underdog until the underdog stops playing by the rules, until the quiet one stops being quiet, until the one they overlooked refuses to be ignored. They were comfortable with you being small, with you staying in the background, with you living in the space they carved out for you. But what they failed to realize is that you were never meant to stay there, because every scar they left on you, you turned it into armor. Every betrayal, you used it as a lesson. Every doubt, you transformed it into fire. They thought they broke you, but all they did was forge something stronger, something more dangerous than they ever could have imagined. You are not stepping into your power. You have been powerful. The only difference is now you're done hiding it, and now the tables have turned. Because here you are, standing where they never thought you would stand. They see it now, the shift, the fire, the undeniable presence of someone who no longer seeks approval, no longer waits for permission, no longer asks if they are worthy of the space they take up. They don't recognize you anymore, and that's exactly how it was meant to be. So now let them watch, let them stare, let them scramble to make sense of the force they never saw coming, because you moved in silence, but you didn't stay there. There is beauty in silence, but you didn't stay there. There was a moment, clear, undeniable, when they finally saw you. Not as the person they once dismissed, not as the quiet one, the forgotten one, the one they assumed would always stay in their place. No, they saw you for what you had become, unstoppable, because you no longer asked for permission, you no longer waited for approval, you no longer sought their validation like a starving soul desperate for crumbs. That version of you, the one who tiptoed around their expectations, the one who hesitated, the one who second-guessed their worth, was gone. And in its place stood something they never anticipated, a force beyond control. They thought they had silenced you, but what they failed to realize is that your silence was never empty. It was gathering, it was building, it was the inhale before the roar, the moment before impact, the calm before the storm breaks the sky wide open. And now, the storm has arrived. They don't understand how it happened. How someone they overlooked, underestimated, and cast aside is now standing at the center of everything, commanding attention without begging for it. But the truth is, this was always in you. It was never a matter of if, only when. And now, it's too late for them to stop you. They thought you needed them. They thought you feared them. They thought you would always be the shadow, never the light. But they were wrong. Because you don't move for them, you don't rise for them, you don't become for them. You do it for you. This is the turning point, the moment where you step into yourself fully, without hesitation, without apology. The moment where every lesson, every pain, every scar transforms into something undeniable. You are no longer just surviving, you are thriving. You are no longer just existing, you are defining. You are the storm they never saw coming. And now they have no choice but to watch as you rise. They look at you now and they don't recognize what they see. The timid one? Gone. The one who once shrank in the corners, who hesitated before speaking, who walked carefully so as not to disturb the space they were told wasn't theirs to take up. On, in their place, stands something undeniable, something unshakable, something they never saw coming. You don't whisper anymore, you command. You don't ask anymore, you decide. You don't wait anymore, you move. This isn't arrogance, this isn't defiance for the sake of rebellion. This is power reclaimed. This is what happens when someone who was told to stay in their place finally understands that the place they were assigned was never meant for them. This is what happens when someone stops asking, stops hoping, stops begging to be seen, and instead becomes impossible to ignore. The shift is in your presence, in the way you carry yourself, in the way your energy enters the room before you even say a word. They don't need to be told you have changed. They feel it. And that feeling, that discomfort they have when they realize they can no longer place you in a box, that is fear. Because the greatest fear of those who doubted you was never that you would fail. It was that you would realize your power, that you would break the mold, rewrite the rules, and prove every limitation they placed on you was nothing but an illusion. And now, here you stand, the living proof of their greatest nightmare. Not because you sought revenge, not because you wished for their downfall, but because you rose anyway. And now, the question remains, who are you now? You are no longer the version of yourself they remember. You are no longer waiting for their approval. You are no longer controlled by their opinions, their expectations, their fears. So Jane, take their loot, them with you. They will do anything for you. You are something they cannot define, cannot contain, cannot silence. And the most powerful part? You don't have to tell them you've changed. They already know. The moment is here. The choice is yours. You've felt the shift. You've seen the transformation. You are not who you were when this journey began. You are not the version of yourself that hesitated, that questioned, that waited for permission. You have broken the mold, shattered expectations, and reclaimed everything they told you wasn't yours to have. But now, the real question remains, what will you do with it? Will you let this be just another moment? Just another spark that fades before it turns to fire? Or will you take this power, this undeniable force within you, and turn it into something unstoppable? Because now that you know, now that you have seen who you truly are, there is no going back. You cannot unlearn this truth. You cannot unfeel this strength. You cannot return to the version of yourself that waited in the shadows, hoping the world would notice. That version of you is gone. So, what comes next? Will you step forward? Will you make the move that changes everything? Will you finally stop waiting and start becoming? Because the world, it's watching. Not in judgment, not in doubt, but in anticipation. Waiting to see what you will do now that you know. And this is the moment where you decide. Not tomorrow, not someday, not when you feel ready. Now. Because readiness is not something you wait for. It is something you step into. So, tell me, are you ready? Because the world is waiting for your next move. And this time, it will hear you loud and clear.